he cooperates. He tells the cops, he's like, yeah, listen, man, this guy Matt Cox, he's running a scam. He used to be a mortgage broker. He's currently on federal probation, and he's doing a much bigger scam. He's borrowed over $10 million in Ybor City, and he's taken the banks for millions, and they don't even know they've been scammed.
All right, joined by a very special guest, Matt Cox. He's on the FBI's most wanted list. He's an author now, and he's got a cool story. And I'm really excited to talk to him. You're gonna love his story. Thanks for coming on, man.
Sure, no problem.
I want to start off before we get into, the your main, I guess, story. What a lot of people know you for. Whereabouts exactly did you grow up, and what was it like being a kid for you?
I grew up in Tampa, Florida, in the U.S. And I had a like a learning disability. I'm dyslexic, so it's hard for me to read and write. And I ended up being placed in. Well, at first I was placed in special like classes, but still, I started running away from school. So my parents put me in like a special school for kids with learning disabilities. And yeah, I eventually graduated high school. Like I didn't get into any real trouble in, growing up. But then again, I went to a school that was probably an hour, at least 30 minutes to an hour away from where I lived. So I didn't have a lot of friends because, you typically your friends are from school,
Yeah.
some of them at least. And so I had very few friends. And my dad had a drinking problem. He was an alcoholic, so it was a little chaotic, but it wasn't a chaotic because I was like a bad kid or anything. I just had some problems, and I was kind of a loner.
Yeah, it's got to be tough. Yeah, I've seen you say you had, like trouble learning and like a learning problem. But looking at all your interviews and things, I'm like, yeah, you're like a genius.
I,
So s-
I appreciate it, but it's I'll say that, and then I'll get people in the comment section. They're always like, "You're not dumb." I'm like, I didn't say I was dumb. I said I have a learning disability. So
yeah,
if you heard me read, I read. I don't read. It's not fluent. It's very jumbled. It's almost like listening to a third or fourth grader read. And when I write, like I have to write stuff and then rewrite it. Like obviously with the advent of Word and word processing and those types of functions, it's much easier because of course now you can, I sound brilliant because I can type it out and the computer fixes everything for me. They're like, oh yeah, I don't know what you're trying to say here. This word's wrong. That's not the word. You might want to use this word. So, I'm much better now than I was when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, there was nothing, like Apple had just come out with because I'm old. I'm 54 years old. So I mean, I remember when I was like 13, 14 years old, Apple had just come out with like the desktop computer. So there was no, I didn't have one.
yeah, yeah,
So, it took a while before technology kind of helped me.
definitely. Yeah, come a long way, and I love to see that you got a book out as well. And you're right, you've been doing other people's stories. And
Yeah.
even watching your show now, I feel like every time I log in and go on your YouTube channel or somewhere, it from the last time I checked it, it seems you're constantly growing and you're like in leaps and bounds.
Yeah. It's doing pretty good. I mean, it's doing really good
Yeah.
in comparison to what the average YouTuber does. My channel's done really well. I mean, it was a struggle for the first few years. And then I had 3 or 4 really good videos. And I mean, like my subscriber base jumped like
Yeah.
that. I think it was like 115,000 subscribers in a year. But really it was honestly, it was like 70 or 80,000 in just a few months because of this one video I did. And then and honestly, I did that video, and I'll tell you right now, I'd have never thought this video was going to blow up. The guy was in tears the entire, not the entire, but I'd say 70% of the interview. He was in tears. He was a former police officer that had been wrongfully accused, and this is by his department, like the FBI. or the DEA got involved. They ended up indicting him. He went to trial. He was found not guilty. Then they turned around and indicted him again, went to trial, got that one, won that case. Then he got indicted again, and they dropped the charges because they were like, there's just not enough evidence to prosecute him. I mean, it's just the county that he was a former sheriff's deputy was out to get him, and the corruption was just so overwhelming. And he was traumatized by it. But if you've ever done an interview with someone who's, just really upset and they're just, they could barely get their story out, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
I mean, after an hour and a half, I was desperate for this guy to get off, to just be done. Yeah. And I remember thinking, nobody's watching this. This was agony. I think 850,000 views.
Wow.
850,000 views. The TikToks got, 3 or 4 million. The short, I had one short that's got like 5.9 million views. I don't have anything like them. My stuff gets 1,000, 3,000, maybe 10,000. Like if I get one that's got over 10,000, I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
And we put them out every day. We put out shorts every single day.
Yeah.
So we have a really good chance of getting a lot of views on shorts because you're pumping them out.
Yeah. And do you always just try and put one out a day? Is that like your goal? Or
Yeah,
I guess
it's funny because so I do them, my editor does them. He has a guy that I don't want to say assistant, but a guy that works with him. I'm sure he's whatever. He's got an editor that works with him. That guy's name is Luke. I think and he's like a kid too. He's like 18 or 19. He like just graduated high school.
Cool.
So he does them. So it's like all of us are constantly doing shorts, and sometimes we'll do the same. We'll watch a video, one of the videos I do, and we both, like 2 or 3 of us will do the same story. But even if you did the story in a minute and I did it and condensed it, edited a story down to a minute, and somebody else, like, you get different versions of the same story. So yeah, and so we end up putting out at least one. Sometimes it's 2 a day.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you do them really well too. I love how you do your shorts. It's so well formatted. Yeah, it looks cool.
Honestly, to be honest, I put so much time into those things. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It really, that the payoff is it's not worth it.
Yeah. It's
but
coming.
But you do the shorts, right? I've seen you're doing your shorts, more and more. You're getting better, better at them. Like you put one up, you're just excited that you got one done.
Yeah.
And then the next time you tweak it a little bit. And then the next time you're blowing up the thing. And the next time you're like, what if I added B-roll in? How do I get B-roll? You start getting better over the months. And what happens is people don't realize that 1 minute short took you 2 hours.
Yeah.
To put it together. And they have no idea. They're like, there's no way this took 2 hours. You're like, yeah, man, that took 2 hours. I mean, I had to screen record stuff from YouTube. I had to splice it together. I had to edit all of this together. I had to find, video. I had to find the videos, which takes you searching. Then I had to trim down the video. I had to resize the video. I had to get the music. Like, man, it takes forever to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
And then it gets 3,000 views.
Yeah.
And you're like, it gets like 1,200 views. And you're like, I can't believe that thing took 2 or 3 hours. I got 1,200 views.
Yeah, it's crazy how it works. I got to thank you. I'm always grateful for the advice you've given me too. And you've definitely helped me improve heaps. I seen too you had Ignacio Esteban on your show. He's cool. I like talking to him.
He's good.
Yeah,
he's good. His do really well. Yeah. So I ended up, after I graduated like high school, I barely graduated high school. I ended up going to college. I tried to work for maybe a year and a half, and I tried to be an insurance adjuster, and that didn't work out. And then I tried to worked in construction, and the chick I was dating ended up, well, not really what happened. Well, I did work construction, but I ended up going to college. And after I went to college, I got a degree in fine arts, which is like, worth nothing. So I graduated college, and the girl I was dating was working started working for a subprime lender, a mortgage company. And she convinced me to try and work, for the mortgage company, try it out. And I tried it out and I did really well. Unfortunately, like the very first loan I did was, fraud. So it had fraud in it, so I don't know. Not every, I'm not sure what your definition of fraud is. And every country, has different forms of lending as far as buying houses. And some, a lot of countries, they don't even lend on houses. So it's like, if you want to buy a house, you've got to buy a house cash, but in the US, you can, and I'm sure in Australia, you can get a mortgage, right? The bank
Yeah.
will lend you the money to buy the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, right. So that's what a mortgage broker was I would broker those loans. You'd come to me and I'd put together a file for you and I'd ship it to different companies and try and get one of them to lend you the money. Well, the very first loan I had a 30-day late. The woman that I was getting the loan for had a 30-day late on her rent. So that means she'd been more than 30 days late on her rent within the last 24 months. And the bank's not going to lend you that. So my manager pointed it out. I had, because I was new, I didn't even notice it. And she suggested I white it out,
Yeah.
which is completely
Yeah.
illegal. You're not allowed, you can't do that. That's you're committing fraud. You're lying to the bank. The moment you lie to the bank, you're committing fraud. But I trusted her, so I whited it out. And I was desperate for cash too. I was my car payment was behind. My credit was so slowly going. I was behind on everything. So I did it and it went through underwriting. They said it was okay. We closed maybe a week later, 4 or 5 days later, and I got a check for like $3,500, which was a ton of money. That was a ton of money.
Yeah.
At that time it was a ton of money. I'd be happy with $35 right now.
Yeah.
It was that's a chunk of money. So especially 25, 30 years ago. So I was thrilled
Yeah.
to get that money. So almost 30 years ago. So I got the check, and the next person that came in, they had something that was wrong with their credit too. That person they didn't have enough money in the bank for a long enough period of time. They had the money to close, but you have to have the money to close in your bank account for like 90 days or 60 days. They didn't have that. So I changed the bank statements. Definitely fraud, but it went through. How are they going to check? How are they going to find that? Like it's like it's one or two numbers on a bank statement that if you call the bank, they've got the money. They don't know well, they'd have to really, really pinpoint what was wrong to find it. So I altered those. Then I altered somebody's W-2. Then I altered some other document. It's just got worse and worse. I started making more, and I started making more and more documents to get these people qualified. But I kept closing loans. So I'm making a ton of money. I'm making like $10,000, $12,000 a month. I was thrilled. My bills are paid. So I worked at that company for 6 months, maybe 8 months, and then it closed. And I ended up, I went to work for somebody else briefly, and then I ended up opening my own company. I hired a bunch of guys. We're making, there's just a ton of fraud going through that company. It was called Consortium Financial Services, and it was just a ton of fraud. So, and we were getting more and more creative. Like, I started making fake banks, so if you needed to show that you had money in the bank, I could provide you bank statement showing you had the money in the bank. If just showing that maybe that you'd been making your mortgage payments or your rent payments, I could verify your rent payments. You've been making them through the bank. We'd send a document. If they called the bank, we could verify it. So, I had online banks. I had companies that I was creating that would also verify your employment. I had W-2s, pay stubs. So if you walked in that office, you were getting a loan.
Yeah.
You were absolutely getting a loan. Like unless you just had, like, somebody walks in the office and they claim bankruptcy 6 months ago, there's nothing I can do. You had a bankruptcy, like it's on your credit. There's nothing I can do. But if your credit was semi-solid in the least, then I could probably get you into a house. So we were doing that I did that for, it was a few years, and I ended up getting married, and My wife and I bought a bunch of rental properties, like $1 million worth of rental properties, and she was collecting the rent on those properties. And all of those loans were fraud. And she didn't have a job. So we didn't, the down payments were all fake. Like we'd buy a house for, let's say the house is let's say it's a 4-unit building and it's worth $100,000.
Yeah.
And you couldn't buy anything for $100,000 around here now, but we would get one for, let's say, 100,000, and then we get an appraisal that said it was worth 150, and so she'd get, let's say, an 80% loan. So she'd get a loan from the bank for, $110,000, let's say, or I'm sorry, 120. She'd get a $120,000 loan. So, but we only needed 100. So we bring 30,000 to the closing. We get a check cut to a construction company for 50,000. So we just made $20,000 on the closing. So we're supposed to be bringing 20% to close, but really we're walking away with 20 grand. Oh, I'm sorry. We're supposed to be bringing 30,000 just to close, and we're actually bringing 30, but walking away with 50. So we're actually making 20 grand on the closing. So it's profitable to even buy the property at this point. And so we bought a ton of those properties. Everything was going good. And a friend of mine that owned a mortgage company, she and her husband had gotten into trouble with the FBI. And, and we were very close friends. So they ended up, well, first they asked me if I could refinance their house to get them the money for their lawyer. It was 75 grand. So I refinanced their house, used a fake W-2, fake pay stubs, everything. Got them the 75 grand. They give the 75 grand to their attorney, and their attorney says, you need to wear a wire on this guy for the FBI, and then you don't have to go to jail. Oh. He's like, this guy just refinanced your house using all fraudulent document. Like, this guy's perfect. He's right for the pickings. And I was. So, they wired up. We went to a pizza place for lunch, and they started telling me that the FBI was asking me questions about me and the loans that I'd done for my wife. And I immediately just buried myself. I was like, oh my God, you didn't tell them that the W-2s are fake, did you? You didn't tell them the pay stubs are fake, did you? You didn't tell them that we're married, did you? Because there was something, they didn't, in the loan applications, we said we weren't married. So I just buried myself, and even during that conversation, I realized that they were wired. Yeah. And I was like, holy shit, like it just dawned on me in the middle of the conversation. And I told them to have the FBI just call me, have the FBI officer just call me. And I left. He called me and he asked me to come down to the FBI building and be interviewed. And I said I would. And then I ended up calling several lawyers, and I went and saw several lawyers, and I got a lawyer, and that lawyer also cost me 75 grand. He called the FBI and told the FBI I wouldn't be coming down. And over the next 3-4 months, we negotiated a plea where I would just accept one count of wire fraud. Yeah. And they would drop the charges. They wouldn't charge my wife, because technically she was the one who had borrowed the money and filled out the paperwork. And I just said, no, it was me. She didn't know anything. But, I did that. I was sentenced to 3 years probation, but I couldn't run the mortgage company anymore. So, what am I going to do? So my source of income's gone. I'm on probation. I'm a felon. And what I decided to do was to start flipping properties, like buying houses cheap. I don't know. Is that what they call them in Australia? Flipping?
Yeah. It's pretty much the same. Like, buy them, fix them up, and sell them.
Rehabs. Yeah. You buy it cheap. You buy it for 50 grand. You put 25 in it. You sell it. You make 25,000. Yeah. So I was going to start doing that, but it's horrible work. It's construction work. It's backbreaking work. Like, those guys, that's horrible. It's bad. And it was they were at bad areas. Like, I didn't have enough money to buy properties in really, really nice areas. And it's scary to buy a property in a nice area. Like, what if it doesn't sell? You've got all your money wrapped up. So, so I went in and I started buying these houses that were super inexpensive. But by that point, my wife and I were getting a divorce, and I was dating a chick that worked at a title company. And I told her, I said, look, how can I get these houses to appraise higher? How can the appraisals are based on comparable sales in the area, right? I'm not sure how it works,
Yeah,
in
it's
the
about the
UK.
same
I
with
mean,
like the median house range. Yeah.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So you send out a guy and he looks around and he says, okay, that house over there sold for 100,000. That one sold for 100. That one sold for 100. Yours is about the same square footage. Those are within half a mile. Your house is worth about 100,000. Well, my problem was I wanted to get these properties to appraise higher. And so she told me if I just recorded the sales higher. So when you buy these things for 50,000, if you just record them for 200,000 and you record enough of them in an area, they'll all start showing up for 200,000.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. So the second problem is nobody was buying houses for 200,000 in that area.
Yeah.
Houses were going for 60,000. So what I figured, so there's something called a straw man scam, right? So let's say you have perfect credit and I say to you, look, I need you to buy this house for 200,000 and when you'll get a loan for 180, because you have to put some money down. So you'll bring 20,000 down, 20,000 to put down as your down payment. You'll borrow 180 from the bank. I only bought the house for 50. I put 10 in it to clean it up. Maybe it took some good pictures, but hey, we're going to make, we'll make 120,000, 100 and, so, and we'll split it. The problem is I don't want to split it. You know, like what happens is then you have to make the payments and it's going to ruin your credit. You're not going to rent this house out for anything near that. There's always problems. Somebody always feels like they got screwed over because 6 months later, you're trying to make the payment. Your money's gone. You're pissed at me. Oh, you screwed me over. What are you talking about? You knew you had to make the payments,
Yeah.
or you just let them go. Hey, you do 5 of these things. You make, let's say you were going to make, I don't know, 5 times 300,000, and now you got to let it go, and now you got to claim bankruptcy or whatever. Well, the problem is that guy now he's like, well, you screwed me over, got bad credit. You got 300 grand. Oh, I spent that 300 grand. That's not my fault, and that's really is how it always goes. Like people, they'll say anything and they'll agree to anything to get a chunk of money up front, and then they get it and they piss it away, and then they say, oh, you screwed me over. What are you talking about? You agreed to this.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to deal with that because I'd flipped properties in the past. I'd always been flipping properties the whole time. Once I started the mortgage company, I was constantly buying. You come across deals, and there's always an issue. It's always some jerk off is complaining about something, and even though you've been over backward to get him in a house that he never should have gotten into. So I just decided I didn't want to deal with that. So what I did was I started making what's called synthetic identities. And those are like fake. So what I figured out how to get our social security. Like, what do you guys call your social security numbers? You have like a version of it, right? Everything is based on these numbers for us,
Yeah.
right? Like your credit report,
Yeah.
if you're to collect, if you want to like your income you pay in to collect social security, your retirement fund,
Yeah.
everything's based on this number,
Yeah. Like the tax
right? It's called
department and stuff. Yeah.
right. It's called a social security number. So I went into the Social Security Administration and I figured out how to get them to issue me numbers to children that don't exist. So I couldn't convince them to get them to issue to adults because there's no way you were born in the United States and you don't have one of these numbers. You're not going to make it to be an adult. So that just wasn't flying. But it was reasonable that like a 7-month-old kid or a 10-month-old kid could have been born in the U.S., not in a hospital, like at with like a midwife, and maybe just it got overlooked, like they didn't have it issued. So I convinced them that I've got a kid that never had one issued, and they said, okay, well, all you need to provide is a birth certificate and a shot record. See, if the child was more than 12 months old, they wanted me to bring in the kid. Well, I don't have a kid to bring in, so I show up with a shot record and the birth certificate, and they end up issuing me a social security number for this kid that doesn't exist. Well, I then turn around and I use that to get 3 secured credit cards. Now, obviously, I don't say that when you put in your information and ask for the date of birth, I don't put in that, hey, the kid's 10 months old. I put that it's like a 35-year-old man.
Yeah.
And I put that in. They'll give almost anybody a credit card with security. So I get three secured credit cards. I make the payments, and after a few months, he's got like 700 credit scores. So to get a mortgage in the United States, you only needed at that time, if you had a good job for 2 years and you had been paying your rent for 2 years and you had a down payment, you only needed a 620 credit score. Well, these guys had 700 credit scores, and I could provide W-2s and pay stubs because I had a bunch of businesses that I'd opened on paper. They weren't real businesses, but they looked like it. And you could call them. They were everything worked out. I could say he's been at this bank for 10 years. He's been on a job for 5 years. He's been at this apartment for 5 years, and he's got 700 credit scores. So the banks are dying to lend him money.
Yeah.
And by the way, he just bought this piece of property for $220,000, and he wants to refinance it. And the banks would say, heck yeah, what do you need? Oh, you want borrow $190,000 on this $230,000 piece of property? Of course we'll lend that to you. So I would buy houses. So it ends up that I started building multiple synthetic identities, buying houses in their names, recording the values of those houses at 4 and 5 times their true value. So that ends up making this area that I was buying these houses go up through the roof. So now if you were a real estate agent or an investor, you were driving through that area and you looked for comparable sales. Let's say you went on the MLS, or what is that system that everybody uses now? The real estate system.
I know here we got like realestate.com.au, and you can
yeah,
look
well,
up
let's
all
say
the areas.
it would be the same thing. It would be realestate.com. If you went through an area and started looking for houses, you see all these houses they're selling for 230, 190, 210, 240. You go, this is ridiculous. Oh my God, this is in the area is a shithole. And you'd go, oh, this is insane. And I ended up getting like it ended up being like 10. But I was always kind of working 3 or 4 of them at the same time. And then as they get loaded up, they'd end up with 5 or 6 mortgages. I'd make the payments for a few months, and then I'd stop paying and let them go into foreclosure. And I just start on the next guy. And I always had a few guys going.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is the comparable sales for these properties end up being comparable sales for other properties. So one guy is now who's got 5 houses. The comparable sales I created for him are now real comparable. Well, they're fake, but they're comparable sales for the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. So it ends up being dozens of these comparable sales in this one area. I ended up borrowing like $11.5 million within about 18 months in this one area. And it was great because the banks didn't have any idea that they were being scammed. Like, they would lend the money, they get 4 or 5 payments. The guy had perfect credit. He had perfect credit, perfect job history, perfect rental history. He had money in the bank. He put money down. He refinanced his property. We lent him the money. He made the payments, and then suddenly he just stopped paying. And then they of course they repull your credit, and they see, oh, he's got several other mortgages and credit cards and loans from the banks, and they all stopped. And if they looked into it and they started writing letters, I would write a letter from an imaginary sister of this guy's, and I'd say that he had been in a car accident and he was currently in a coma. And I'd send like a letter or send an article from the newspaper showing that there had been like a 12-car pileup, and he'd been life flighted, and he's in a coma, and he's in critical condition. And I'd say that he's in a coma, and he'll never work again. The doctors say even if he comes out of the coma, he'll never work again. And so they just foreclosed on the property. They put it back on the market because it takes 3 to 6 months to foreclose. They put it back on the market. 6 months later, a year later, it sells, and it sells for $60,000, even though they thought it was worth 220 or 190. And, they kind of shrug it off like, after a year, that property's been trashed. Like, people have broke into it. They've stolen stuff. It's not in a great area. And they just chalk it up to, it was just we just lent, it was a bad call for us we shouldn't have lent that money on that property. But by then I'm gone. I mean, it's too late. Like, and so that scam worked really well. And I was doing it by myself. Well, I mean, there were lots of people that were helping me. I ended up doing that same scam with a girl that I was dating and a buddy of mine. So they're also doing those scams. So they're buying houses and refinancing them. Well, the girl ends up, her scam kind of breaks down, right? She goes to a closing. She gives them their ID, her ID. The woman at the closing looks at the ID and says, "This doesn't look like you." But it was her. She changed her hair, but she had a name. She had the name. She was using the name Rosita Perez, and Rosita Perez is obviously a Spanish name.
Yeah.
And this girl did not look Spanish at all. But there's plenty of reasons why you could have a Spanish name, right? Like, you could have a Spanish name, but this woman was like, "Yeah, this doesn't look like you." And she's like, "It's me." And I remember she said she had another closing agent come in and look at it. And the woman was like, "Yeah, that's her." She was like, "No, something's wrong." And she was like, so she said, "You know what? I'm going to make some phone calls. I'll let you know about the whole transaction." And she let her sign everything, but she didn't give her a check.
Yep.
Now we'd closed another one earlier in the day. So we already had one check for like 100,000. We're getting another check for like 100 and whatever, but she wouldn't give it to her. So she gets in the car and she says, "Yeah, something went wrong." She tells me what happened. I said, "Oh, we're done. We're done. Like that deal's closed. That's over. We're going to have to walk away. We'll start over. We'll have to get another identity. We'll have to start." She was like, "No, what are you talking about? It's fine. It's fine." Well, I didn't think it was fine at all. But then again, she was desperate for money and I had plenty of money by that point. So she ends up talking to the other guy, a friend of mine named Travis, and asks him, "Will you deposit this $100,000 check into your bank account?" And I'm saying, I think the check's tainted. I think that once they figure it out and they start investigating, they're going to figure it out. They're going to figure out the other check. Because at some point a mortgage shows up. Even if they could pull, they could pull her credit and see the inquiry, and they'll call them and say, "Yeah, we just lent her money. We just lent her $100,000." So it's not hard to figure it out. Yep. Even if they didn't do that, they could wait until the mortgage shows up. They could check the title and say, "Hey, a mortgage from Bank of America just showed up." They call Bank of America and say, "Did you lend this person money?" And they go, "Yeah, I did." "Why?" "Here's why. We don't think it's the right person." Whatever. Point is, I'm saying walk away, tear the check up. We're done. She talks to Travis, convinces Travis to deposit the check into his bank account. Travis deposits it. He says, "I'll start getting the money out in a few days when the check clears." Back then, you had to wait for checks to clear. You don't have to really wait for checks to clear anymore, but it was going to take like a week or something. So he goes back in a week, and I called because she kept asking me to call. So I called. I said, "Hey, what's up?" He goes, "Hey, I know she wants the money. I'm going to the bank right now. I'm going to get out like 8 or 9 grand. I'll bring her by some money." And I was like, "Well, actually, that's not what happened." When I called for him to get the money, he said, "I know she wants the money, but I'm not able to get money right now because the bank manager called him and asked him to come back and sign the check in front of him." Oh. He said, "Look, I saw you, or I see that you endorsed the check, but because it's over 100 grand, we have to witness you sign the check." And he was like, "Oh, okay, no big deal." Now, I've deposited lots of checks over 100 grand. I've never had that happen. So I immediately said, "Something's wrong, bro. Don't go back. Something's wrong." And he was like, "No, it's fine. It's fine. You're panicking." Now, keep in mind, he'd already done 3 or 4 of these loans. He'd pulled out like $200,000-$300,000. Like, he feels like it's working like a charm because his scam was working like a charm. Well, basically there was a red, the check was flagged. And so the police were waiting for him. So when he walks into the bank, he gets arrested. He gets arrested. He immediately cooperates, and says, "Look, I, now they don't arrest him for that check, by the way. They arrest him because by this point they figured out that his ID is fake, that everything about, his social security number goes to a 10-month-old. Like the whole scam's broken down for him. So when he walks in, he's done. It's like, one, we got $100,000 check, plus you've deposited $400,000 and you've removed $300,000 in cash. This is an issue. Like, you're in big trouble. So he cooperates. He tells the cops, he's like, "Yeah, listen, man, this guy, Matt Cox, he's running a scam. He used to be a mortgage broker. He's currently on federal probation, and he's doing a much, much bigger scam. He's borrowed over $10 million in Ybor City, and he's taken the banks for millions, and they don't even know they've been scammed. So, and it wasn't hard for them to it wasn't hard for the detectives in Orlando. And I'm in Tampa. This is Orlando, which is about an hour and a half drive. So in Orlando, it's not hard for them to figure it out, because when he said, all you have to do to know that I'm telling the truth is, he goes, you can pull up the records in Hillsborough County, which is the county I'm in. And he goes, okay. And so they pulled it up, and I had named almost all of my synthetic identities. I'd named them names like Michael White, Lee Black, James Red, Brandon Green, David Silver, William Blue. So all this, I thought it was cute.
Yeah.
But it obviously I hadn't thought it through and didn't realize how easy it was to prove that's a scam. I mean, think about it. James Red bought 5 houses. They all went into foreclosure. Oh, look, William Blue bought 5 houses. They all went into foreclosure. Oh, look, Lee Black bought 5 houses. They all went into foreclosure. Oh, this guy still owns 5 houses. They're not in foreclosure yet, but they will be soon. Look, this guy owns 3 houses because he started buying a month ago. Like, it's very easy to see the scam. The older ones had bought the houses, and 6 months later, they're all in foreclosure.
Yeah. The reservoir dogs.
Yeah, the reservoir dogs thing, which I thought, how, I thought, oh, how funny it is. And,
Yeah,
but,
that's right.
it's just it's cocky, that cockiness and that arrogance, like that I, even to this day, which I would giggle and laugh and everything, but it's
It's
just,
pretty funny.
yeah. But I look back and I think, boy, you are fucking dumbass. Like, what were you didn't even make it hard for him. You're so fucking smart. You just laid it out for him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so my buddy Travis gets out of jail. I get him an attorney. I set him up in a business. I'm giving him money every week because I'm terrified he's going to say something. I don't realize he already has,
Oh,
and that he's currently working. Keep in mind, too, another time I paid for his attorney, and his attorney said, you need to cooperate with the authorities. They're going to put together a task force. A task force in the United States is different than like the FBI. A task force is when local counties get together, and they get like 2 or 3 people from each county to work together, because I was doing this in multiple counties throughout Florida. So so the FBI wasn't involved yet at this level. But once they did the investigation, they put it together, they handed it to the FBI. And about that same time, I'm realizing something's wrong, because I'm getting phone calls from title agents, people that help close the loans. And they're calling me saying, hey, our records were just subpoenaed. Hey, we just had a cop walk in here and they subpoenaed our records from multiple different, hey, get another call 2 days later. Hey, Matt, I'm not supposed to say anything, but we just got a subpoena for all of your records. So I know something's not right, but I still felt like I was okay. It's just the arrogance. I'd gone so long and had so many things that I'd weathered, so many storms I'd weathered. So a friend of mine comes by the office one day. His name's Steve Sutton. He was a sheriff's deputy. And he came by. I remember he was in his sheriff's uniform. He walked in, which always makes you go, huh? It's kind of like,
yeah.
Oh,
Makes you a
shit.
bit nervous.
Yeah, he walks in just for a second. I was like, oh, it's Steve. And he goes, Matt, can I talk to you outside for a second? I go, yeah, what's up? I walk outside. What's going on? He's looking around. He's like, I used to date this woman in the Tampa Police Department. I said, okay. And he said she was working on a task force recently. It just got handed to the FBI. I said, okay. He has a task force. They were investigating you. She said the FBI is going to come arrest you in a couple of days. Listen, I tell you right now, the amount of heat that shot up through my feet into my fucking chest, like just whoosh. And I mean, I must have immediately started sweating. I was just like, wow. Like, wow, that's a bad situation. Like, there's nothing you can do.
No.
Like, I'd come close to being arrested so many times, or having the scam exposed so many times and kind of beaten it. Like, I'd been caught before red-handed by banks that had called me up and said, hey, we know this is fraud. We know this person doesn't exist. And I've just paid them back. I'm like, look, let's not call. They're like, we're going to call the FBI. And I just like, listen, let me just give you the money back. And they were like, you got the money? I was like, yeah. And I'd pay them back. So I had beat I'd been in jams and gotten out of it. You know, you're not getting out of this jam. It's too late. The genie's out of the bottle. So he was like, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Man, I'm leaving, bro. Like, I can't go to prison. You know, I'm a little guy. I saw Shawshank Redemption. I can't do it. I'm not doing it. Like, I didn't know there were camps. Like in you know, in the United States, you have different levels of prisons. You know, I didn't know anything about prison. So I don't know anybody who's been to prison. All I've ever seen is Shawshank Redemption. I thought you go in there, they're putting you in there with, you know, murderers and, you know, violent criminals. And I'm thinking I'm fair game. I'm a little white guy. It's not going to be good for me. So I pack my bags and I take off. I remember I bought a car. I bought like an Audi A8 that I could drive. The chick I was dating came with me. You know, it was just like there were so many mistakes that I made. Like, I invited it. No, I didn't even invite her. She begged to come with me. We've been dating like 4 or 5 weeks, and she begged to come with me. And then she knew what was going on. I told her what was happening. She didn't give a shit. So she's ready to go. So she comes with me. We go to Atlanta. And by this point, keep in mind, I figured out how to get the Department of Motor Vehicles to issue me driver's licenses. So when I leave, I've got IDs ready. Like, I've got drivers, like I can go get a driver's license. I go in and we drove to Atlanta, got in a place, and then we went to Alabama and got a driver's license. You know, we went to Texas, we went and got different driver's licenses. And so I'm driving a car, you know, in somebody else's name, or, you know, a fake ID's name. We start stealing people's identities. We start surveying homeless people to get their information. Because there was no Obama phones back then. They had what, I don't know if you know this is. They're called Obama phones.
Yeah.
Where basically, if you're homeless, you can go get a free phone.
Yeah.
They'll give you like a phone. Like, everybody's a cheap little $80 phone, but what does it matter? Like, you get a phone and phone service, and now you're a homeless guy walking around with a fucking phone. Back then, you didn't have that.
Yeah.
So to me, if you're some guy living under the bridge, and I go up to you and I give you $20 and I say, "Hey, we're taking surveys to." You know, I'm a survey taker. We're trying to determine where we're going to place our next homeless facility.
Yeah.
And I give him $20, and he thinks he's just taking a survey. It's going to pay him $20. He gives me all his information. He gives me his social security number, his date of birth, his mother's maiden name, where he was born, what county, if he's ever been in the military, if he's ever applied for social security disability, if he's on Medicare, I've got everything. I got everything I need to order his documents online. Go into a DMV, a driver's license, driving motor vehicles, and get a driver's license in his name. Because the funny thing is like in the US, every state has its own, they call them, DMVs, right?
Yeah.
Department of Motor Vehicles. Every state has one. Here's the funny thing. They share information, but they're all connected to like a hub.
Yeah.
So Georgia cannot access North Carolina's information. They send a request to the hub and they say, "Hey, we need this information." And they then send them the information. But back then, they didn't send photos. So I could go get a driver's license in Georgia. Even if I had a driver's license in North Carolina, they could say, "Hey, you have a driver's license in North Carolina." And I could say, "Yeah, I know. I just moved from there. Here's my lease. I'm a resident of Georgia." They would give me a driver's license because they couldn't cross-reference the photo. They couldn't see, "Hey, that's not you." So they'd give it to me.
Wow.
And keep in mind too, I'd get passports the same way. I'd go in the passport because I would ask, one of the questions was, "Have you ever had a US passport?" And these guys would say, "Oh, no, I've never had one." "Oh, okay, great. I'll get one of those in your name next week." So, 2 weeks later, I go get a passport in the guy's name. So I've got a passport, I'm traveling. I'm going to Italy. I'm going to Venice. I'm going to Italy, Venice. What am I saying? I'm going to Italy. I'm going to Greece. We're going to Croatia. We're going to Bermuda. We're going to Mexico. We're going to Jamaica. Like, I'm traveling. I'm doing okay. Even though when I left Florida, I didn't have much money. I forgot to mention this, but when I went to Georgia and I rented that house, we rented the house from a guy named Michael Shanahan. As soon as we rented the house, I went downtown to the Atlanta Public Records and I pulled this guy's documents on his house to see if he had any mortgages, which he did. And I created satisfaction of mortgages from the banks.
Yeah.
So if you went to public records and you looked up this guy's house, you'd say, "Oh, look, this house is in the name Michael Shanahan." But Michael Shanahan owes Bank of America a first mortgage for $160,000. And oh, look, he even took out a second mortgage for $20,000. So I went and I saw that. And then I created a fake satisfaction of mortgage. And I recorded those documents in public records. So it looked like Bank of America satisfied those loans.
Yeah.
But they didn't.
Yo.
Excuse
That's
me.
brilliant.
So now I own this. I'm living in this house.
Yo.
It's worth about 200,000. And I get a driver's license in the name Michael Shanahan. I then call 3 hard money lenders. And these are guys that they don't pull your credit, because keep in mind, I need about 6 months to build up somebody's credit, and I haven't been there for 6 months.
Yeah.
So I've got an ID and I got a birth certificate. I've got an ID in his name and I have a social security number. It's not his social security number, but I have one.
Yep.
And if you could pull Michael Shanahan's credit using the name Michael Shanahan, his social security, the social security number I'd had issued, a date of birth, and it would pull up his credit, but they'd be like, "Yeah, you've only got a couple credit cards, no credit scores." So the bank's not going to lend me money, but a hard money lender will lend you money.
Yeah.
And so the hard money lender said, "Yeah, I'll lend you 150,000." I said, "Okay." Well, I called 3 of these guys. So I meet one at, let's say, 10 o'clock in the morning, one at like 1 o'clock, and one the next day at 4 o'clock or something. And all of them said, "I'll lend you about 150. And when can we schedule a closing?" And I schedule closings at different title companies. And so each one of them lends me $150,000 roughly on the same day. So I get those, and then I deposit those checks into banks. And I start pulling the money out in cash. I pull out roughly $400,000. In cash. Of course, you got debit cards and stuff. We're spending money, doing other stuff, but you pull out about 400,000 in cash. And then we took off. We took off on the run again. So we go to another area. We set up residence in North Carolina and Charlotte, in downtown Charlotte, which is a nice city. Get a real, like, now we've got some money.
Yeah.
So now we're going places, we're traveling, we're doing shit. And we're buying cars, we're living in a nice condo, like it's like nice. And I start running a scam in South Carolina. I surveyed a homeless guy named Gary Sullivan, which was a homeless prostitute in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
So we'd gone to Las Vegas one time. We were driving around. I said, "Hey, let's survey some guys." And we pull in, and I survey this guy, and I'm taking down his information. And one of the questions I would ask is, do you have a felony? And the guy was like, "No." He's like, "I've been arrested a few times, but they're not felonies. They're just misdemeanors." And I was like, "Oh, what were you arrested for?" And he goes, "Prostitution." I was like, "Prostitution?"
Yep.
And he was like, "Yeah." He's like, he offered to blow a cop for $20. He'd been arrested several times. He goes, "But it's a misdemeanor here." I was like, "Oh, okay. You're a prostitute." He's like, "Right." I was like, "Okay, that's cool. Whatever."
Yep.
Like, I take his information, I leave, I go get an ID in his name in South Carolina, and I buy 2 houses in his name in South Carolina. I open a couple bank accounts in his name. I open a corporation in his name, get a couple cell phones. So
Man.
Gary Sullivan is refinanced. I bought 2 houses in his name, satisfied the loans on those houses, and then refinanced them several times. So I get like 1.3 million in his name, Gary Sullivan. I'm pulling the money out. There was no Bitcoin or anything, right? Like, there's so many ways to remove money now, but back then it was like cash.
Yep.
Like I could buy gold or diamonds or something, but I don't know anything about golds or diamonds, and I wasn't in a hurry. So it's like, if I got like 5 or 6 different bank accounts, I can go in every bank every couple of days and pull out 5 grand, 8 grand. It's not raising any eyebrows. When I refinanced that house multiple times, I had gone to a bank called BB&T Bank, and I applied for a loan, and the loan officer went on vacation. Right, she took my application and boop, went on vacation. By the time she comes back, I'm already closing loans. So she calls me up, says, "Hey, we're going to go ahead and we can schedule the closing for next week." And I was like, "No. I already refinanced with my bank."
Yeah.
She's like, "Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were in a hurry." I was like, "Well, I mean, yeah, what happened?" She's like, "Oh, I went on vacation." I was like, "Oh, okay, no problem." She said, and I said, "Hey, you didn't order title, did you?" And she goes, "Yeah, I did, but don't worry about it." And I went, "Well, I don't want anybody to have to go out of their way." See, if you order title, what they do is they send someone downtown to public records to search the records.
Oh,
My fear is if they send somebody downtown to search the records, they may see the loans that are currently closing and being recorded.
yeah.
Well, this woman, she said, "Oh, don't worry." I said, "Oh, no. I just make sure they don't do it." Oh, she's like, "Oh, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal." I kind of put it out of my mind, like, okay, it'll probably be fine. Well, the difference between probably being fine and being fine is a huge difference when you're committing fraud.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, it'll probably be fine. And then one day, a week later, I go into the bank and I'd removed maybe 600,000. And you remember the 400,000 that we had from before? Like, that's gone. We've blown that. So we've been on the run for over a year now. And we're just blowing through money. So I go in the bank and I'm removing money and I'm waiting for them to go get the money. And 2 sheriff's deputies walk up behind me, grab me by the wrist, and slap handcuffs on me. And I'm like, holy shit. And they said, "Mr. Sullivan, you're being detained. Come this way." And they walk me into the manager's office. Everybody's staring. I'm like, what's going on? Like, I'm doing my whole golly gee whiz. What happened, officer? What's happening? I'm doing that whole routine. And they said, "Look, we don't know. We're waiting for the detective to come." And so when they said detective, I thought they meant FBI, because by this point there had been a couple dozen newspaper articles in the newspapers. But they were all like in the Florida newspaper. They were in like Georgia. There had been some in the Chicago Tribune for some reason, which I have no idea why. That's they were. It was called The Fugitives, where they were doing a whole series of articles. They did like 3 or 4 articles on us. So I'm sitting there in the office and we're waiting for the detective, and I thought it was going to be like an FBI agent. The guy walks in and he's a guy in his 30s. Well, no, I'm sorry, he's probably in his late 20s. He walks in, he goes, he said, "Hey, Mr. Sullivan, just want to let you know, we're looking into a complaint." I'm like, "Bro, what's going on?" And he said that Wachovia Bank had filed a complaint. Well, they wanted me arrested because they said I was running what's called a shotgunning scam, which meant I was closing loans so fast that they were filing before the banks were realizing what was happening. I was removing the cash, which is exactly what I was doing. And I was like, "What? What's that?" And so I end up convincing him. He gets the head of Wachovia on the phone. And I convinced that, so the head of Wachovia's fraud department, I'm sorry, the head of Wachovia's fraud department, he's on the phone and he's saying, "This is fraud. This guy's committing fraud." And I'm saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." So we go back and forth, and he's saying he's got 3 mortgages on this property. Now, I actually had like 6 mortgages on the property, but they only caught 3 of them, so that was pretty cool. So I'm like, okay. I'm like, no. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, I do. But what is that illegal? And the deputy is like, "I don't have no idea." Guy from Wachovia saying it is illegal. And he goes, "You have 3 first mortgages." And I'm like, "I don't have 3 first mortgages. I have a first mortgage with Wachovia." I have to say that he knows his is first. I said, "I have a second mortgage with SunTrust, and I have a third mortgage, which is a home equity line of credit with this other company." And so, which makes sense. People do that. And so he's like, "That's not true." And he's screaming. and we're going back and forth. And I'm like, how? I wouldn't even know how to do something like this. Like, I work for a labor company and I have business cards that say I work for a labor company. If you call the phone number, somebody answers and they'll tell you that I work there, or they'll forward the phone number to my cell number. They'll tell you I've been working there. I mean, it's ridiculous. I really did have it set up well.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is I'm telling him I wouldn't know how to do this if I tried. Like, I couldn't pull this off. And I said, what makes more sense? That a guy who works for a labor company, convinced 3 banks to lend him like $500,000, or that the loan officers at that bank figured out how to get this guy 3 mortgages so they could make a commission. I'm like, there's no, like, I wouldn't know how to do this. And so as we're arguing about that, and it's making sense to the detective, he's like, yeah, I don't think this guy could do this. I don't think he'd be able to do this. He's like, I think you might have a problem at the bank. And the fraud guy is screaming his head off. Well, he ends up saying he's using a fake ID. Look at his ID. And the ID, keep in mind, this is a guy who's in California. He's screaming about the South Carolina ID. He said it's a fake ID. Look at it. It starts with 000. And their IDs start with like 000755502 dash whatever.
Yeah.
So it was legit, because I really had gotten it issued from. So he screamed, he's using a fake ID. His ID is fake. And which was a huge mistake on his part.
Yeah.
The detective looks at the ID and says, listen, I ran this guy through the NCIC system. This is a real South Carolina ID. This is Gary Sullivan. And I looked at him and I go, oh, come on, man. Now I'm not Gary Sullivan. I go, bro, what are we doing here? And he's like, I know, Gary, I know. So he ends up hanging up. Like, he ends up not hanging up, but he ends up getting off the phone with the guy. He's like, listen, I'm going to take this guy downtown. I'm going to fill out a police report. I don't even think he's done anything wrong. This guy's losing it. So he hangs up the phone, tells me, follow me downtown. Yeah. So I'm like, okay. So I follow him downtown. We go inside the police station and I fill out the police report. And he ends up letting me go. And I was funny. So when I waited in the police department, my wanted photo was in the police department. It's on the wall. There's like probably 3 dozen of them of different wanted posters, but mine is there and I can see it. So he comes up behind me while I'm like, holy shit. And he's like, hey, Gary, you ready to go? I was like, absolutely. So I leave. He walks me out. I get in my car. And I remember my girlfriend at the time had called me. She had probably called 2 dozen times, because I told her when I was on my way there, I told her I'm on my way. I just got handcuffed. They're taking me to the police department. They want me to fill out a police report. I'm leaving. She's like, get on the interstate, run. I'm like, I'm not running. Like, there's a cop car behind me. The detective's in front of me. Like, I can't run. I have to go. Yeah. But it's okay. I've got this. And she's like, oh my God. And I remember telling her, look, worst that will happen is they'll arrest me as Gary Sullivan, because they don't think my identity, they don't think it's a stolen identity. They believe I'm Gary Sullivan. So I'm like, they might arrest me. You just got to get me a lawyer and get me out on bond before like my fingerprints come back. Yeah. And I remember she said, I'm not getting you out on bond. Like, I'm not risking all the money and everything I have, because she had all the money. I don't have any money on me. So she had already relocated, because at this point, I'm just trying to get out the 1.3 million and then we're gone. We're leaving. Yeah. So she had already relocated. She's living in like Houston, Texas, which is across the country. I'm in South Carolina, which is next. It's just above, Georgia and Florida. So she's told me that when I went into the police department. So when I get out and I'm leaving and I pick up the phone, she's been calling me over and over and over again. I pick up the phone and I remember screaming at her, you fuck it. I was just lost it on her, because she was saying like, I'm not coming to get you. And I've gone in and I didn't get arrested. I'm leaving. Yeah. But now I'm pissed. Anyway, I end up going to 2 more banks. I get out more money. I get on the interstate. I leave. I go back I go to North Carolina, which is like an hour and a half drive. So I go to North Carolina, go back to the apartment, pack up the apartment in a U-Haul truck, drive all the way to Texas, which is a 2-day drive.
Wow.
So I drive to Texas, unload the U-Haul at a storage place. She and I are driving around. We get into a huge argument. And I tell her, like, and I just realized, like, I can't deal with this chick anymore. I mean, every time we get into it, she's the kind of chick, you get into an argument with her and she screams and hollers and wants to argue all night long. She'd had the cops called twice. Like, we're on the run. You
Yeah.
can't do that. I don't care how upset you are. So she's screaming at me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm done. I'm just leaving. So we end up arguing, and she gives me, now we have like 600 grand. She ends up giving me $100,000.
Yeah.
And I leave. Now she just, that argument. So it's, the point is if I had taken half that money, I was afraid she'd just call the police. Like, she was that erratic.
Yeah.
So we agreed on 100 grand. I take 100 grand. I go downstairs. I get in the U-Haul van, which is now empty, by the way.
Yeah.
I drive back to North Carolina. I get my car, which by now I know the FBI listen, I'm number one on the Secret Service's most wanted list at this point. So I'm number one on the Secret Service's most wanted list. And I'm on the FBI's most wanted list. And I'm also on the U.S. Marshals most wanted list. So they're all looking for me. So, and I know they're looking for me at this point. They've tracked the name that was on the car I was driving. The tag was in a guy named Michael Eckert's name. And that registration went to my real address in North Carolina. So I know they're gonna be close. So I don't go to the apartment because I think I'm not gonna go to the apartment because I know they're probably watching. I go into the parking garage, and it's one of those parking garages like the multi-level, you drive up, it's all concrete. So I'm way up 4 or 5 levels up. I go there, I look for my car, I get in my car, I'm freaking out. I back out, I drive across the street and catty corner to the apartment complex. I stop, and this is in downtown. These buildings are 20, 30 stories high, right? So I park downtown. I go into Starbucks. So I figure I'm going to get some coffee, and I'm going to relocate. Like, I can't stay I can't stay in Charlotte anymore. So I walk into the Starbucks, and I'm sitting in there, and I'm thinking, I'm good. I got my car, got 100 grand, starting over, got rid of that chick. She was a fucking drain. Thank God she's gone.
Yeah.
Like, I'm good. I don't have an ID. I have no good ID because I left all the IDs in the storage unit.
Yeah.
She wouldn't give me the key. So that's a done deal. But I got an ID. I'm driving around on an ID on a car that the cops are looking for, but I'm good. I'm going to be okay. I don't get a lot of tickets.
Yep.
So I'll be all right. I'm going to relocate, and I'll start over. And I had some fresh information. I had surveyed some homeless guys. So I still had their stuff. I'm sitting there, I'm waiting to get my coffee, and I look over, and there's 2 people from the apartment complex there. I look over at them. They're staring at me. They're having what I would characterize as a frantic discussion. And suddenly the woman bolts out of the place. I think that's weird. And I wait, and the barista gives the guy his coffees. He has several of them. And then they call me, and I get mine, and he's just standing there staring at me. So I walk out of the place. I get in my car. What I didn't realize, I found out later, was that they had just been interviewed by the U.S. Marshals. And the Marshals were still at the apartment complex. So the woman bolted across to the apartment complex to tell them he's at the Starbucks. I get in my car, start my car. And as I'm starting my car, and I'm kind of like looking around like I'm about to pull out, but I'm messing with the radio and kind of, you put your seatbelt on, and, and the guy's standing there holding like this tray full of coffees. And I'm kind of wondering, like, what's wrong with this guy? What is his problem? And what I genuinely thought it was that I hadn't paid my rent, and it was like the 3rd or 4th or 5th or something. And the rent's due on the 1st, and I hadn't paid rent. But why would I pay like, $2,000 on this apartment that I'm ditching, So I look over at him, and he's kind of looking. I'm thinking, I don't know how evictions work in North Carolina. So I'm like, I'm not thinking anything, but all of a sudden he starts screaming, he's right here. And I look in the rearview mirror. There's 2 guys running down the street.
Yeah.
I punch it.
Yeah.
Like I just punch it and I drive, I haul ass, but it's just boom, and I'm gone. I actually drive down the street to a homeless facility. It's probably a couple miles away. I see 3 or 4 guys that are standing like outside this homeless place. I pull over immediately and go, "Hey, you guys!" I said, "You said I work for the Salvation Army." I said, "We're taking surveys right now to determine where we place our next homeless facility. It pays $20 cash right now to take you 5 minutes. It's a survey. I just need your name, a few basic information." They're like, "Oh yeah, you pays $20 right now, $20." They're like, "Yeah," and I survey them, jump in my car, and this is literally the cops are like 2 miles away. I jump back in the car. I drive to Nashville, Tennessee. I rent a place there. I order documents in one of these guys. I order these guys documents, right? Like I know what their names and everything. So I order their documents. Takes me a day or two to get, electric and water and, everything hooked up. Wi-Fi, or not Wi-Fi. There was no Wi-Fi then. It was like cable and,
Yeah.
whatever. So internet, so it's still it was still fast internet. It wasn't like dial up, but still. So I get everything hooked up. Takes a couple of days. I get it hooked up. I go online. I order all their documents. I get the documents, and then I mail them off. And I get the documents back. And within a week, I get a driver's license. I'm there maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. I've got a driver's license in the one guy's name. I end up getting a car. I then take that vehicle I was driving. I was driving in an Infiniti. I had a brand new Infiniti. At that time, the G35s had just come out. So I drive that car all the way back. This really kills me. Like you understand that the plate is in the name, Michael Eckert, and the cops are looking for the plate. But I drive all the way back to Tennessee, and I leave it in the parking lot of long-term parking in the airport. And I get on a plane. I fly back to Nashville. So I drive to Charlotte. Sorry, I leave it in the Charlotte International Airport's long-term parking. I get on a plane. I fly back to Nashville, Tennessee, drive back. I've got my car. I've got an ID, got an apartment. I'm good.
Yeah.
I dick around for about 3 months doing nothing, working out, hanging out, driving around the city, not really knowing where I'm going. I find this one little spot and I decide I'm going to start buying houses and pull out some money. So I start buying houses. I renovate the houses, very, very limited renovation, like just to clean them up on the outside. Start recording the value higher.
Yeah.
I start dating this chick. I lived there for like a year and a half, pulled out like between $3.5 and $4.5 million. At that point, so I'm doing the same scam all over again. I'm buying the houses for 60,000, 50, 60, 70,000. I'm recording the house at 200 and something thousand. I refinance the house, pull the money out. I start dating this chick, and we're doing great. And then one day she finds out who I am. She knows who I am. One day she's checking the internet and she sees that Dateline NBC News is coming out and that they're doing a 1 hour special on me.
Holy sh!
So what we do is we start pulling out money. She's like, "Okay, that's it. You've got to leave." Like I'd had stuff come out. I'd been in like Bloomberg Business Week. I'd been in Fortune magazine. I'd been in a bunch of articles, but these were articles like I don't know anybody that's, the local newspaper in Tampa, and it's not like people they weren't internet savvy then. They're not searching people.
Checking every detail.
Yeah, this is back in like 2006.
Yeah.
So people are on the internet, but it's not that big of a deal. I decide that and she decides, she's like, "Yeah, you got to leave. We can't stay in the United States. So we're going to pull as much money out and we're just going to leave. We're actually going to go to Australia."
Yeah.
Because Australia at that time, I don't know how it is now, but at that time, I guess they were I'd read like an article and she was telling me she'd done all this research that the population was stagnant.
Yeah.
And they were offering incentives for people that had jobs in job fields that they needed. And they were giving them like several years, like tax exemptions if they came. Well, I didn't have one of those jobs that I could prove. But the other thing they were doing is they were saying you could come here and open a business if you came with it was like $100,000 and a business plan. They would let you come to Australia. You could buy property, you could get a driver's license, you couldn't vote, you couldn't take a job, but you could hire Aussies, right? You could
Yep.
hire people, you can open a job, you could open a business. And I'm thinking, I'm going to show up with millions.
Yeah.
So if I show up there with millions and a business plan, oh, and the biggest thing was this: if you wanted to be a citizen, they you had to have your fingerprints taken,
Yeah. Okay.
but you could become a permanent resident alien, and you didn't have to have your fingers printed. So that was, and of course you can't vote, you can't take a job, but I don't want to take a job and I don't care about voting, but I
Yeah.
could buy property. So I thought I'll go there with a few $1,000,000. I'll buy some property and I'll just rent them out. I
Yeah.
just rent the properties out and that's it. We're pulling money out of properties. We're asking people to cash checks. Like I got a bunch of contractors that work for me. I got laborers that work for me. So I'm going to guys and saying, look, here's a check for $6,000. Can you go cash this? Sure. No problem. They go and they cash the check and give me $6,000. And I'd give them $100 or $200 to do it.
Yep.
So that's working good. We're doing that for a few weeks. So we're really starting to get some cash. My girlfriend ends up telling a friend of hers who I am, who I was, and that we were leaving the country. And we were leaving because I was going to be on Dateline. So she looks me up. She sees that I'm wanted. She calls the Secret Service. And she calls the Secret Service and they watched my house for 2 or 3 days. And then one day I come home and they arrested me.
Man.
It sucks, right? Like it's a shitty
Yeah.
fucking ending to a story.
Yeah. You're almost out.
Yeah. Well, and it seems that way. Like I always liked, for a long time, I liked to think that, yeah, I would have gone to Australia and I would have been fine. But the truth is, eventually, I think they would have caught me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm cocky and I'm arrogant. And I would have done something stupid. And I probably would have maybe I would have gone to Australia and tried to run a scam or, or maybe just I would have gone to Australia and Dateline would have caught up to me there.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be 2 years later on a rerun. Some guy would see it and be like, oh my God, that guy comes in here for a coffee every day.
Yeah.
And they just call the local authorities and sit there in the coffee shop for 2 days. And I walk in one day and the guy would go, that's him. That's him. And I
Yeah.
get arrested. So, I think ultimately I would have been caught despite what this chick did. And to be honest, with what she read online, she did what a normal citizen should do. Like I don't harbor any ill will against her. She did the right thing.
Yeah.
You know, everybody did the right thing. I was doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And it caught up to me and I got arrested. I went to prison. I ended up doing 13 years. I initially got a sentence of 26 years. I got my sentence reduced twice. I did 13 years,
Wow.
13 years for fraud.
That's nuts.
For fraud.
Why so long? Like, yeah, you hear people doing violent crimes and not getting that long.
I know everybody else says that. Like people in England, people in Canada are like, are you serious?
That's
Keep in mind, I
crazy.
got 26 years. I was supposed to do 23 years. My out date was 2030.
Holy shit.
So, yeah. So I got my sentence reduced twice. I did 13 years. I got out 4.5 years ago.
Wow. I'm
I
glad
started
you
YouTube.
got out, man.
Yeah, me too.
Like,
I started a
yes.
YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I started a YouTube channel, what, 3 years ago?
Wow.
Yeah, a little over 3 years ago, I think. At
Yeah.
this point, might be 3 years, 3.5. No, yeah, a little over 3 years ago. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Man, what an amazing story. To me, it's like, I feel like if they're making a movie, it'd be like The Big Short meets Catch Me If You Can.
Right. It's funny because it's actually been pitched.
Wow.
Like that, like they're like, because I wrote a book. I have a book.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. Like I got out. Like my books sell. I have a book called Shark in the Housing Pool. It's my memoir, and of course, it's way better than the story I just told because
Yeah.
it's like 10 hours. Like
Yeah.
it's also on Audible, but it takes like 10 hours. So,
Yeah.
but I gave you a very condensed version because it would take hours and hours, and it'd be
Yeah.
forever. Like I've gotten out. It's been pitched several times. Nobody's picked it up. It's been. It's. I know it's.
An insane
I don't
story.
know what the issue is,
Yeah.
but I actually wrote several stories of other guys' stories when I was locked up in prison,
Yeah.
and I've optioned their stories. Their stories have been pitched. I've had a couple of minor episodes done on my story and on other people's stories. yeah, I haven't had anything really happen, and I don't know. We'll see what happens, and maybe something happens, maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
I think it's got to happen, man. Yeah, it's one
Yeah,
of the
listen,
craziest stories I've ever heard.
I'm getting discouraged,
Don't.
so we'll see.
I've seen one story of it cracked me up. I don't know if it should have, but I've seen you even went to like traffic school as one of the fake IDs. Oh, not fake,
Oh
the
yeah,
real ID.
I had. Well, actually, here's the problem. That one wasn't a homeless guy. That was I used to put ads in newspapers, and so I put an ad in a newspaper saying, "Hey, good credit, bad credit, no, oh, wait, no, wait, home loans available, good credit, bad credit, no problem. Call now, free applications, and a phone number." And sometimes I'd put like government loans available.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure what that means, but people would call and I'd take an application on them because I was a mortgage broker, so I know how to take an application. So it sounds very legitimate. I asked their name, date of birth, social security number, where have you lived in the past, 2 years, where do you currently work? I need, 2 years worth of employment. I need, you just start asking the questions. How much do you make on a monthly basis? What is your gross? What is you just, it comes off, it's very credible.
Yeah.
So I would take people's information, and then if they were a good candidate, I would then order their birth certificate, social security number. I'd register to vote in their name.
Yeah.
And then I'd go get that information that I'd get that information in. And then I go into the local DMV and I'd get a driver's license in their name. Well, this one guy, I got like 3 tickets in his name. And listen, after about the third ticket
Yeah.
within a year, you'll lose your license.
Yeah.
So I had to go to traffic school to keep his license. They sent me to traffic school. So I'm going to traffic school as someone else. And by the way, I've got a car in his name, bank accounts in his name. I one time stole someone's identity and then I had his name legally changed because I was trying to kind of figure out how can I kind of piggyback off of his real information to create a completely fabricated identity that doesn't connect. So I went through the process and actually hired an attorney, paid $1,500, got his name changed, just his last name. And just to kind of see what I could do and what's possible and what's not possible. So yeah, I've got just, keep in mind I've had plastic surgery, I've had a nose job, I had what's called a mini facelift, I had 2 hair transplants, liposuction, like I had my teeth were done. Like I was desperate to not get caught.
Yeah.
They're genuinely like, it's not like I was throwing caution to the wind. I genuinely thought I'm not getting caught. And,
Yeah.
ultimately I did, but I made an effort. It's not like
Yeah.
I was driving around with a stolen car and a broken tail light,
Yeah.
not, because it's, I get pulled over and the cop would walk up and boom, I give him my driver's license and he'd pull it and full coverage insurance and the car's registered in my name, in the name of the person I'm using. And I got a valid driver's license. Like
Yeah.
you're not going to, they're not pulling me out of the car and saying, oh, this license is,
Yeah.
invalid or your registration isn't valid. We're going to have to tow your car. Like none of that's happening.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, it's easy to stay legal on all your documents because this is not a full-time job. So I've got a ton of money and I've got all the time in the world. Like it's not like, hey, I'm working 50 hours a week and I didn't have time to register my vehicle.
Yeah.
And so they're going to pull me over for an expired tag. And, like I got a DUI, like I don't drink. I'm not getting a DUI. Like there's none of the things that fuck up normal criminals are going to fuck me up, but I still got fucked up. So it's upsetting.
Yeah. Damn it. But
Yeah,
the movie's gonna come out one day, man.
we'll
It's
see.
it'll happen. Like someone has to make it. It's has a story that needs to be out there.
Well, I mean, I've had so many close calls where they've pitched it, and it's just every time it's come back, they're like, "Oh, or what's even worse is that you'll have it pitched, and they don't even tell you no.
Yeah.
They
Okay.
just stop. They're gonna go have a meeting, and then they're gonna have another meeting, and they're gonna talk to Tom, and they're waiting for Brad to get back from vacation, and they're gonna call you back, and then you don't hear from them, and then you send an email, and you don't hear anything, and then you send another email, and you don't hear anything. You send another email, and then you realize, it's over.
Yeah.
You just never hear from them again.
Man.
And then A month later, somebody else contacts you from another production company, and we have 3 meetings and we have a couple Zoom meetings. We do this, we do that, and then they're gonna pitch me in the meeting, and they pitched it, and they pitched the idea of a series, and it's amazing, and everybody's excited. They got to talk to Jim, and Tom is on vacation, but when he gets back, we're gonna talk to him, and we're gonna this, and then and then a month later, you're texting, "Hey, what's going on? I never heard from you. What happened with that?" And you don't get anything back, and you text them again 2 weeks later, you don't hear anything, and then it's just it's over.
Yeah.
I don't know what happens at that stage
Yo.
that it just stops, and they go, and
Surely.
and I've got a book. Like, it's not like
Yeah.
it's not like, hey, I need somebody to write all this down. I've got a book, I got
Yo.
a podcast, I have a following.
Yeah.
It's not like nobody's ever heard of me. Like, you look me up, and I'm everywhere. It's the
Yeah.
story's credible. I was on multiple. Listen, I was on American Greed. I was on Dateline. I've had multiple programs, series, or episodes done on documentary style programs.
Yeah, you look you up anywhere on like YouTube and you got millions of views on you, like just crazy.
It's just not happening.
Yeah.
I don't
Maybe,
know.
maybe some
Maybe
banks
in
trying to shut it
Australia,
down.
we need an Australian producer to see it.
Yes.
That's what we need. We need an Australian.
Someone who,
They'll go. Yeah. Yeah.
okay, this
They're
is
not gonna
nuts.
be scared. They're gonna be like, I'm all in.
Yeah, let's do it. Dundee. Yeah. Or something I always ask everyone, what advice would you give to someone who wants to maybe start a YouTube channel or, anything like that? Like just start anything really.
I mean, the YouTube channel thing, like, I love YouTube. I mean, I know several guys that have started YouTube channels, and they're slowly growing.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, if you like it, like, it's not a big deal. It's not like, the problem is, it's the anxiety of first starting it. And then once you get into that groove, and you just do, maybe one interview a week, or whatever you're talking about, whether it's addiction or whatever your interest is, and you do, one video a week, you get better at editing, you get better at shorts, you put it up, and you start producing and uploading that content. After a year or so, YouTube will start pushing your stuff if you're consistent.
Yeah.
So I know some guys that have started, and their channels are huge, and they've blown by me. They've,
Wow.
like, I'm doing well, but it's a grind. It was not paying anything for a year or two. Like, it just really
Wow.
started paying in the last year or so. So, and it's gotten to a point now where it's finally basically paying my bills
Yeah.
every month. But that took years.
Yeah.
And keep in mind too, it's not like I don't just put up videos. Like, I'm lucky, I've got a story, so I get to go on other people's podcasts, and hopefully what happens is I conscript some of those subscribers, and that's the goal to come on here, is that hopefully some of your guys go over and they subscribe.
Yeah.
Is that 20 guys? Is it 5, or is it 300?
Yeah.
I don't know. And the other thing is, you don't know what's going to hit.
Yeah.
You don't know what video is going to hit. So, it may be discouraging if you're going to it thinking, I'm going to blow up. Well, you're going to be disappointed, because I know a guy who is absolutely amazing, as good, if not better of a story than me, more interesting. He's just super smart, great storyteller. He had one channel taken down by YouTube. He was doing well for about 6 months. And one day he was interviewing this former escort, and he was scrolling through the page, like where escorts, they advertise.
Yeah.
And as he's scrolling through it, it had several naked women on it, not realizing he's putting that on his channel. So he uploads it and puts it up. YouTube saw it, boom, took his channel down completely. When they realized, he didn't even realize what he had done. And these are tiny little images. Like, honestly, I never even thought, couldn't even see it. Like, I was paying attention to the ads, how they were running them, because he's just interviewing her. She had gotten arrested, gone to jail. His whole channel goes down. It takes him about 6 more months before he sets up a whole new channel. Started over probably 6 or 7 months ago, and he's starting from ground zero. That means that he had run it for, I don't know how long he'd run it. I want to say 6 months to a year he'd run it, but it was starting to get traction.
Yeah.
And now he's starting behind the eight ball. He's starting all over again. And will it take off again? I don't know. And then you have other guys that go on and they don't even have a story.
Yeah.
They don't have like they've got some guy who went to jail for 2 years and within 6 months he's got 200,000 subscribers. He's blowing up. He's making $20,000 a month, and you're going, how is this possible?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, the short version is you don't know. You
Yeah.
don't know what's going to hit. If you like it and you take it seriously, I mean, then I think ultimately it probably pays off. The other thing is most people don't want to start a channel. Like they're like, oh, I don't have the camera. I don't have this. I don't have that. I don't have a studio. I don't have the right equipment. Well, you've got an iPhone. Like you can start it with an iPhone. Oh, those look horrible. They really don't. Some of my first videos were done with iPhones.
Yeah.
So, and they don't look too bad. And what does it matter? Even if you do it with an iPhone and they're absolutely horrendous, first of all, nobody's watching your channel, bro.
Yeah.
Like you just started. Nobody's watching it. So what is it? The only people watching your channel is your friends and family who you send that video to. So what does it matter?
Yeah.
And secondly, it's good to start off at the bottom and your videos are horrible, because then people will see over the next year or two, they'll see how much you've improved.
Yeah.
And they'll get invested in your journey and they'll want to see you succeed. And those are the best guys.
Yeah.
Those are the best, viewers or subscribers that really want to see you, and they stick with you till the end, and they tell all their friends and they share your videos because they've been watching you since pretty much the beginning. They've seen how good you've gotten, how you're slowly upgrading your equipment. You're getting better at video, at editing, and they'll go, God, your first short sucked.
Yeah.
But then you put out, 10 or 20 of those. And then the next, then you tried that one thing and you were like, man, that's good.
Yeah.
And then you started doing that. And then you started adding this. And then, and listen, 6 months later, listen, if you see my shorts, some of the shorts that I do, they're like I said, I put way too much time into them, but they're extremely professionally done.
Yeah. Awesome.
Better than most of the shorts. They may not get the most views, but I'm very proud of them.
Oh,
And
man, every time I
you know,
open it, I feel inspired. I'm like, man, he just killed this again.
they're great. What's funny? It reminds me of. You have a yard? Like do you mow your yard?
Yeah. Yeah. I just
Right.
mowed it yesterday as I've been on
It's that
holidays.
right, but it's that feeling when you step back
Yeah.
and you've mowed your yard and you've edged it and everything's and you get that feeling of, it's not that you're like, oh, thank God that's over. You kind of look at your yard and you're like, nice. It's that feeling of accomplishment, like, wow, I did that. Most people don't have that, but all YouTubers have that. When they finish a video and they put it up, even it doesn't even matter if it's the best yard. It doesn't matter if it's the best video. You get to step back and go, wow, man, I did that. That's a good feeling. I think ultimately that pays off.
I just, sticking with it. I've had a couple of a couple of ones I've done, and I've put so much effort into the whole interview, like editing and stuff. I have no views, and then I'll have another one where I don't do anything. I'm like, oh, I don't care, and I put it out, and it just sort of takes off more than anything else. And I didn't put any
Listen,
hashtags or yeah,
I had a guy that came in here, flew in, like this guy flew in here from California, from San Francisco.
yeah,
Like called me one day, or he sent me an email. Hey man, I'd like to do your show. Got him on the phone. We talked for 5 minutes. Yeah, I went to prison here, state here. I did federal time here. I was selling drugs. This is what happened. Boom, boom, boom. Real quick. And I said, okay, listen, bro. I said, if you'll fly yourself, I said, we could do a StreamYard, but if you come in person, you'll probably get more views. But I mean, that's up to you. You're in California. You said, I want to do it in person. I said, okay, well, I'm not paying to fly you in. Like I can't pay to fly. I don't make enough money to pay to fly people in and put them up in a hotel. He's like, no, I'll fly myself in. It's fine. I said, okay, when can you do it? It was like 3 weeks later. He said, oh yeah, I got it. Then he texted me and said, hey man, I booked my thing. I said, okay, cool. Basically forgot about it.
Yeah.
And then a couple days beforehand, I saw that it was coming up that, oh, hey, I have an in-person podcast. I sent him a text. Hey, bro, you still coming? And he's like, yeah, man, I'll be there. Like he's flying across the country. That's a fucking $300 or $400 ticket. And he's going to stay for $200. He's going to stay overnight. He's spending 600 and some odd dollars to come. And I haven't heard anything except for that one text. Usually people are texting left and right.
yeah.
And then I texted him that morning. He said, yeah, man. He said, I'm here. I got in last night. I'm here. I'm on my way. Okay. He shows up. We do the interview. It was okay.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't think it was great. When it was done, I thought it was okay, but he had a little bit more of an interesting drug dealer story. But it was basically kind of a feel good story. Like, this is what I did, but now I'm doing this and I'm doing better. And it was a good story, but it wasn't spectacular. And we put it up, and I remember telling my editor, I said, it'll get 8 or 10,000 views. That's got like 21,000 views at this point. People are watching. It's a 2-hour video. People are watching 45 minutes to 50 minutes of a 2-hour video. That's a lot of watch time. Like people don't realize like that. You're lucky if you get 20% watch time. That's almost 50. That's 40% watch time.
Yeah.
People love this guy. I mean, but I couldn't have seen that coming. Like, there are times where guys will leave and I'll be like, that was an amazing story. That's going to do great. Gets 8,000 views. It's like, I really thought that was going to be like a huge story.
Like take off.
Yeah. And keep in mind too, when the first few videos we put up, they've got 50.
Yeah.
Now they have like 1,000, 2,000, but that's 3 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a long time, but at this point, I've got so many subscribers. If I put something up, it should get 5,000 views, at least 5 or 10. And every once in a while, you get one that you put it up and it gets 100,000 views, but that's very rare.
Yeah,
Very
that's good numbers. Like, people, especially at that watch time as well. That's
that watch
cool.
time's huge, and it's still going. It's getting like 400 a day. It might taper off, obviously.
One thing I did want to ask you was, I seen you did the interview with Patrick Bet David. What was he like to meet in person?
What's so funny? When I did that interview, I was telling somebody that the other day because somebody else came here and did an interview with me, and they were like, "Man, I saw you did an interview with Patrick Bet David. That was a great interview, man. He's so cool. When I did his, he didn't even have 1 million subscribers yet.
Wow.
Like, he was like nobody. So I remember telling my wife, I said, I don't think I could get on a show right now. Like, in the same situation, if I had, I couldn't have gotten on a show.
Wow.
And they reached out to me. I didn't reach out to them because I had just done one show, and then maybe 2 weeks later, I got a request to do an interview with them. So I had no idea who he was or anything. Cool. And at that time, he was in Texas. He flew me out to Texas. I did the interview with him. He's a giant, by the way. Like, I'm 5'6". The guy's like 6'4", 6'5". He's massive. And he is, honestly, so we spent 2 hours together. They trimmed it down to like an hour and change, and we talked for another 45 minutes afterward.
Yep.
He is exactly the person that you see on those videos. Nice, level-headed, super polite, just like a good, a good solid guy, like level-headed, he's not a jerk off. He doesn't say rude things. He's very polite. He's exactly the person that you see.